welcome slide. If you are willing, we would love to have you introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and your role and your organization and what you hope to learn about today. My name is Katie Brackenridge. I really appreciate everyone jumping in on this webinar. I'm Deb Moroney from AIR, and I are both really excited to be here to share some ideas about the role of expanded learning, or after school and summer, in the changing world of COVID-19. And we are gonna just be totally transparent to say this environment is changing so quickly that this presentation has also changed quite a few times. So we're hoping that it gives you some good food for thought. We're hoping it includes the latest thinking around all of this, knowing that literally day by day, week by week, the situation is changing, the information and environment is changing so quickly. My name's Katie Brackenridge. I'm a partnership director for Turnaround for Children. Turnaround for Children, some of you may know, is a nonprofit based in New York City. We take the science of learning and development, which you're going to hear a lot about today, and translate it into practices and structures and systems to help schools and school districts take a whole child approach to education. I have been at Turnaround for less than a year, and the previous part of my career has been entirely around expanded learning, which is what we in California call after school and summer programs. So this intersection on this webinar today is a reflection of what I've learned at Turnaround and what I know and how it relates to after school and summer programs and the great opportunities here. I'm going to turn it over to Deb for a second to introduce herself. I'm very excited to be co-presenting with Deb Moroney, who is my colleague of many years and good friend. Deb, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Deb Moroney, as Katie mentioned. I'm Managing Director at the American Institutes for Research. American Institutes for Research, which many people know as AIR, has been around. We're about to celebrate our 75th birthday. So we're an old, big non-for-profit research, policy, and practice organization. I am situated in a group of around 100 people that aims to support the positive development of young people, both in school and in out-of-school time settings. So as Katie alluded to, we've worked together for a very long time. And this topic today is near and dear to my heart because we really are talking about the intersection between schools and out-of-school time settings and our shared endeavor to support whole child education. So thanks so much for having me. I am located in the Chicago area where we are finally getting some warm weather today.
Nice. That's great. Thanks so much, Deb. And just so folks know, Deb and I are going to try to keep it conversational in front of 300-ish people. We'll see how that goes. So she may interrupt me and I may interrupt her, and we've agreed that that's okay. We also have two colleagues joining us. Dawn Foreman is with Turnaround for Children and Jill Young is with AIR, and they are both going to be monitoring the chat box. They may be chatting with you. And if you have a key question, you should at any time feel free to put it in the chat box, and we'll be asking them for those questions as we go along. And then we're also have saved some time at the end for questions. So just feel free to load up the chat box with your conversations and your questions. So today what we're going to be doing, like we've said, is exploring how expanded learning, or sorry, I keep saying that, I should use my national language, how after school and summer programs can have an essential role as we adjust to the changing situations for schools and school districts given COVID-19. We are going to do that by talking first about the value of partnerships, the research that's shown how important the partnerships across sectors are for young people, families, all of us. We're going to connect that then to the science of learning and development, how the brain develops, responds to trauma, and what that means for teaching and learning. And this new framework that Turnaround for Children has been presenting around some essential R's and how that all connects to youth development. And then we're going to pop it back out to talk about the most recent frameworks for K-12 redesign that your roles could really fit into, and hopefully spark some thinking about how that might work. And we will be saving some time for Q&A. You all probably know the drill by now. I have muted you, I think, and I'm sorry for that, because we would love to be able to have a big chat, and we'd love to be in a big room with you, having breakout sessions and all of that, but we're not. So we encourage you to use the chat box for a place to have that chatting happen. With that intro, I'm going to turn it over to Deb, like I said, for the first agenda item, which is talking about partnerships across multiple sectors and why they matter and how important they are. Deb and I just discovered that we can share control of the screen. We also discovered that sometimes it doesn't work well. So she's going to, I think, control the screen right now.
We're going to try. Thank you, Katie. And thanks really all of you for taking your time and joining us today. And I think that we all can agree, as we endeavor to support young people's learning and development, both in school and out of school time, that it takes partnerships in order to do so. And I think the phrase might be getting tired, but I'm going to say it, and now more than ever, those partnerships are critically valuable as we endeavor to ask adults and young people how they are doing and what they need. There is no way that any one program or system or classroom or teacher can possibly respond to the myriad of needs and supports that we all really need right now. And so we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the value of partnerships, both now and how we've come to this place. So here's the true test of my slide moving. Yes, success early on. And so, you know, we all know that over the past 10 years, there's been a resurgence, not a new initiative, but a resurgence of interest and passion and support and supporting whole child education, both in school and things like social and emotional learning and skill building in out of school time settings. And as such, the Aspen Institute convened a National Commission on Social and Emotional and Academic Development, which was led by education leaders in research, policy, and practice. And their charge really was to reimagine education with whole child learning and development at its core, and to come to consensus of how to make recommendations to move that forward in this new era of education. And so in 2019, they put out these 6 recommendations, which I will let you read and we can share the report with you. But I'd like to draw your attention to recommendation 5, which is the green one up on your screen, that says align resources and leverage partners in the community to address the whole child. And this really was a hard-won recommendation. This came from one of the commissioners who is the co-founder and CEO of the Forum for Youth Investment. Many of you may have heard her name, Karen Pittman, who said, yeah, that's great. We can support whole child education in schools, but we cannot do it alone. We need the strengths and assets from our community partners, which come in the form of after-school programs, summer programs, librarians, community-based opportunity youth programs. And really, she brought those stakeholders together to inform and propel this recommendation. So we're glad it's here and it's in ink, and I think we should really take it with us right now as K-12 systems endeavor to rebuild and reopen, and we fortify our role in that rebuilding. There I go. And so, as I mentioned, we all grow and learn and develop across all of these settings. It does not happen in one place or another, but for whatever reason, our field is separated into these sectors. And as we move into rebuilding efforts, it's tempting, as things are difficult and budgets are cut and things are complicated, to look within our sector, to stay within the school building, or if you're in the school, to stay within the after-school program. But we really need to road test our partnerships. So if you think back 6 months on your partnership, to really road test that partnership to say, hey, I know it's really hard what you're doing, and it's really hard what I'm doing too, but unless we work together, we're not really going to be able to answer that how are you doing question with a sufficient amount of services and supports for families. And so this is by no means an exhaustive ecosystem. If you think of your programs, and I'm kind of going to ask you to do that right now. As Katie said, it would be more fun if we were together, to really think about the program or the school that you're in and all of the partnerships that you had, formal or informal, all the adults in all of the settings who are working together to support learning and development, and thinking about how we can, even in this really sensitive environment, reach out to those folks and more so we can respond more fully.
Deb, actually, I'm going to jump in on that slide for a sec, acknowledging that there are lots of people on the phone from multiple pieces of this ecosystem, including, I noticed on the attendee list, a bunch of schools and school districts, as well as a lot of community-based and school-based after school and summer programs. And one of the things that I think we can anticipate is that as families come back into the system, they are going to reach out in multiple directions. And one direction we know they're going to reach is towards after school and summer programs, because traditionally there have been such strong bonds, sometimes stronger than there are between the family and the traditional school day. Really because of logistics, right? People pick up their kids from the after school program in the evening so they see the staff, so they have connections and relationships with them. So I think we can really anticipate that after school and summer programs may be the first point of contact for some families. Certainly if summer programs open up, that's going to be true. So there's an immediate point for partnership from the schools to after school to families, to be making sure everyone is holistically inviting families back into those systems. I know, for example, in California right now, some after school programs are actually reaching out to the families who the districts have lost touch with as distance learning took place. So already those connections in some places exist more between after school and families than they do with schools. So really thinking about that as a super concrete piece of this puzzle that will need to be put back together as people come out of distance learning.
I'm so glad you said that. And I just want to add, from a Chicago perspective, where our schools are not always neighborhood schools, that oftentimes, and this is my background coming from the community-based organization world, oftentimes those programs are staffed by people who are from the community, and young people are commuting to their school, but really are located and know better the people in the community-based organization. So there's another really concrete point of connection. Another, which I was going to maybe save for later, but seems like a good part of the conversation now, and there's my dog, of course, is that, and I think you all know this, is that many community-based organizations and after-school programs have wide networks of other services in the community. And so as all of us need potentially more or different services than we've accessed in the past, that community-based after-school and summer programs might have just a more immediate point of contact with those providers, like mental health providers or employment services, for example. Okay, great. So around the same time that the Aspen Commission for Social, Emotional, and Academic Development was rallying around whole child education in K-12 settings, a well-meaning group of researchers got together to really bring the diverse set of disciplines that have attempted to describe and explore learning and development together in order to create an evidence base that they called the science of learning and development. That group has expanded significantly to include those folks that you see here on the screen, those organizations, many of whom support after school, out of school time, and community-based organizations to really take the diverse science findings and translate them into policy and practice. And so that's what a lot of people are calling SOLD, or the science of learning and development. And before Katie goes into a little bit of detail about how to take those findings into practice, I want to take actually a step back and explore the diverse areas of research that contributed to originally the science of learning and development. So you can hear where it came from and better understand where we can go with it. Thank you. So here are the disciplines. This is actually not an exhaustive list of the disciplines, but as you look at them, I'm sure many of you thought, oh, I took that class in high school or college. I've read a blog post or heard a podcast, or I'm really interested in one of these things. And for all of them, we have experienced our own learning and development. So a lot of the findings in the science of learning and development, I'm sort of fond of saying, are not new or totally surprising. But the new and interesting part is that this wonderful group of people brought these disciplines together, which also include things like anthropology and play research, together to more comprehensively learn how we all learn and grow and develop. But what's really, what people are really grabbing onto, and Katie's going to focus on a little bit later, is the part of this that was brand new, and that is the neuroscience. It almost worked, or Katie did it. That is the neuroscience. And so when I was in graduate school and I was learning cognitive development, or how the brain works, I was learning it based on what people could observe about how the brain worked, what was behavioral. And what we have now are these really amazing maps of the brain so that we can better understand how our brain is learning and transforming and developing in relation to the contexts and settings and relationships we're experiencing. And so this gives us a lot more information about the impact of the work that all of us do in working with young people. And I think the great news to me, as someone who works with all of you, as we endeavor to explain and implement how people learn and develop, is that this isn't another framework. It is not an attempt to silo the work that we do in one way or another. It is really a body of evidence that helps explain the good work that we're doing. And so, and as an example of that, and I'm humbled to be doing this with the Turnaround team on the call. Turnaround for Children created for what is affectionately called the Blue Wheel, which are really, how do you take that science and apply it to practice? And I think for many of you, this will make a lot of sense, that it all starts with positive relationships in safe and supportive environments where we can integrate supports that are individualized and based on assets and needs. When that happens, we create the conditions where young people can develop and build skills, and that's where social and emotional learning comes in, and where we can engage in rich instructional experiences. So Turnaround created this amazing Blue Wheel based on the science to help us understand how to take that great body of research and apply it to practice. But that is not exclusive to K through 12 classrooms. It can be applied in summer programs, community programs, and I think it is applied in community programs, after school programs, libraries, classrooms, of course, at recess, at work. It's my fantasy that we can apply this at work, and in nature programs and beyond. So Katie's going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to sort of foreshadow the idea that all of the science really most immediately can and is being put into practice.
We're so pleased with ourselves for being able to move the slides independently. That's why Deb and I keep smiling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this exactly what this science of learning and development is. Again, this new framework that Turnaround has been talking about that is really specifically for this time that we're in right now, and how that relates to youth development. So I will say that the science that I'm about to talk about is the reason that I joined Turnaround for Children. I was so excited as a lifelong youth development practitioner that there was this science to validate what I knew was really important, what I had seen working with kids, that relationships make so much of a difference, that the positive environments we created actually changed kids' lives. And then to learn that it is all based on our biology was mind-blowing. So I'm excited to share this with you and encourage you to do a couple of things as I'm sharing. One is to think about, what does this mean about our practices and the intentionality behind our practices? And the second is to think about, how can I as a school district, school person, or I as an after-school summer practitioner use this framework to communicate the value of our shared work in support of young people, because there is so much overlap. So as Deb mentioned, years ago, we thought that the brain was actually developed through young childhood and then pretty much was settled. You know, this is the brain that I will have for life. And then through technology, we were able to see how the brain develops actually over our entire lifetime. Yes, it develops more rapidly. There are quick moments of development in early childhood. Adolescence is another time when there's a lot of development, but we know from the technology that we've used to scan people's brains that our brains are changing and developing over our entire lifetime. The other thing we know is that our brains develop in response to our biology and also the context around us. And that happens through our genes. So we know that we have 20,000 genes in the human genome. And we also now know that only 10% of those genes are ever active. So what determines that 10%? It is a process called epigenetics. I'm giving you the incredibly short version of all of this, and I would just invite you, if you want more on the science piece, like exactly what all of this means, there are really great resources on the Sold Alliance website. But in short, the process of epigenetics is the process by which genes respond to the physical and social environment that they're in. And the physical and social cues that they receive are what determines whether they turn on or off. And that information means that our experiences, our environments, our relationships, so the context that we're in is what decides which genes are activated, but decides our kind of capacity as a human being, our interests, our decisions. A lot about who we are is determined by our context. And as you well know, after school and summer programs are very much part of the context of a young person's development. These facts about the brain, that it is malleable, that it develops over our lifetime, and that it responds to our environment, are both an opportunity and a vulnerability. So I'm going to talk first about the vulnerability part of it. As you probably know, learning takes place in the limbic systems of our brain, and that includes the prefrontal cortex, which is often called the control center. It's where our attention, concentration, and focus comes from. It also includes the hippocampus, which is about learning and memory, and the amygdala, which is our emotions center. The limbic system is very responsive to the hormone cortisol, which is activated when we experience stress. And stress can actually be a good thing, right? We know stress is something that gets us focused, alert, able to do things like take a test or compete well on a sports team or do a presentation. But when kids experience stress over a long period of time, and it isn't buffered by anything like positive relationships or a change in environment that can reduce that stress, we know that as toxic stress. And toxic stress actually makes changes in the structure of our limbic system over time. What cortisol does is it, even in lighter doses, right, it triggers our amygdalas to be immediately responsive and to be able to react quickly. That's that fight, flight, or freeze instinct that we have. So again, a reason it is useful, even in dangerous situations, it's the thing that gets us going and allows us to get out of that dangerous situation. But when kids are experiencing this over a long period of time, what happens is that their amygdalas get overdeveloped and in some ways override the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. So it is harder for kids who are experiencing toxic stress, for people who are experiencing toxic stress, to access their learning and memory and self-regulation parts of their brain. And this is part of what you may see in some of your classrooms and after school programs. It is the reason that kids who are experiencing adversity, or as you, I'm sure, know of them, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are 32 times more likely to have learning and behavior challenges in school. It's because that adversity isn't just happening to children, it is happening inside their brains and bodies. It is changing the way their brains work. There's good news. In addition to responding to the hormone cortisol, our bodies also respond to oxytocin, which works directly to counteract the impact of cortisol. And we get oxytocin. That rush of oxytocin is what happens when we experience trust and love. Sometimes it's called the love hormone. And that trust, as you all know, often comes through relationships. So this is the reason, oxytocin is the reason that it feels good when someone smiles at you or gives you a hug or gives you a compliment. Your brain is actually experiencing oxytocin. And part of the way that after school programs release oxytocin is the deep connections that staff and children in programs have across usually a long period of time, and the connections that are deep within families. The other aspect of programs and schools that is important for this balance of oxytocin and cortisol is having a safe, calm, and predictable environment. So you can imagine right away, right? This kind of environment is less likely to have kids who are easily triggered, who are on the alert for danger. They're less likely to get triggered if they're in a safe, calm, and predictable environment. They are also more likely to experience oxytocin because the interactions that are happening in that kind of environment are more likely to feel trusting and positive. So back to the blue wheel. This wheel then describes the kinds of practices and structures that programs, after school, summer programs, and schools need to develop in order for kids to feel supported in all aspects of their development, in order for them to be in those environments with trusting relationships and where there is a level of stability and calm and predictability that allows them to really focus on learning. So none of this is about controlling behavior. It is really about making sure that the brain can stay calm in order to learn. We know that all those pieces of the parts of the limbic system have to be in balance in order for kids to be able to focus on learning. The good news is that those aspects in the blue wheel also show up in our youth development frameworks. So I've just picked one of them, which I know a lot of programs across the country are using, which comes from the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. This is the criteria, the parameters for the youth program quality in assessment tool, sorry. And so we can easily map these aspects of the blue wheel to the kinds of supportive environments and safe environments and trusting interactions and high level of engagement that are the criteria for a high quality after school program. In doing that, what we are hoping for you to see here in this situation is how closely the science is supporting what after school and summer programs are already doing. Adding to this, the Turnaround for Children has recently taken some pieces of the blue wheel and prioritized them in this structure of the 3 R's. And in our case, the 3 R's are relationships, routines, and resilience. And we're talking about these in particular right now, recognizing that when kids come back into the school environment or into the program environment, they may have, we know, we have all had a dysregulating experience, right? We've all experienced a lot more stress than we usually do. We've all been knocked out of our usual relationships and routines, and that's been hard, even if you're living in a relatively stable situation. For kids who are coming from an unstable spot or are not feeling safe in their home environment or their community environment, coming back into school, we're gonna really need to focus on the types of supports that are gonna help them adapt back into these structures and be ready to learn and engage. So we're talking about this in terms of relationships, routines, and resilience. So the relationships piece is kind of a, we know this, we need to be learning about our students' lives, we need to be connecting with them one-on-one, we need to be checking in with their families. In schools, this is about the morning meetings and advisories where teachers can really get to know kids and understand how they're doing every single day. Those kinds of structures are going to help kids experience the oxytocin that they need in order to get ready to be back in a learning environment. Similarly, that dysregulating experience that they've had has knocked them out of the routines that you may have developed with them over all of your work with kids. So you're going to need to recreate, co-create with kids the kinds of norms and expectations and routines that you may have already developed once, and now you're going to go back and do that again, but really taking the time to focus on those routines, not expecting that kids are going to come back into a structured environment ready to engage in the same ways as they might have before. And the final R is around resilience, and we're thinking about this in terms of helping to support kids' emotion regulation, acknowledging that they have, again, been in potentially dysregulating environments, and we're going to need to help them rebuild the skills and strategies that they've used to sort of calm down their emotions, become more self-aware again, and respond appropriately to those emotions, have the strategies in place in order to do that. So an example of a resiliency strategy in this frame would be around mindfulness, for example, reteaching kids the breathing techniques that might have worked for them in the past. Okay. With that frame, with these 3 R's, I'm presenting these to you as a way of thinking about the role that after school and summer programs could play with their school district partners. Like, these are really strong areas for collaboration. I have heard some pressure on program providers to be thinking about academics, the learning loss, and what we know from the science of learning and development is that none of that catch up on academic learning is going to happen unless we're able to reestablish the calm, supportive learning environments and relationships that are going to be so critical for any kind of learning to happen. So I invite folks to consider these 3 R's as a way to start the conversation around the collaboration between the school day, after school, and summer programs.
Katie, can I ask a question?
Yes, Deb.
Thanks. So like the rest of our audience, I'm sure, this is hot off the presses. So it's new to me and I'm really excited. I love the play on the R's, and I think it's a really super tool for programs and schools to use together as we welcome young people into schools and programs. The word resilience, though, has me scratching my head a little bit. Only because for those of us who've been in the field and related fields for a while, it's not a new term. And it's also being used a lot in relation to the pandemic around a lot of different issues. So can you just be really specific here? If I were to talk about relationships and routines, those are really practical and easy terms for me to use and in communicating around school and after school partnerships. But can you help me parse out resilience a little bit and how I can talk about that today?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and it is definitely a question we have heard before. So the way that Turnaround is thinking about this is kind of what I just presented as this immediate need around emotion regulation, right? In order to be resilient, people need to be self-aware of the emotions that they have been experiencing, right, as a result of all of the stress and turmoil that we've been dealing with. And they also need to be aware of the current emotions they're feeling as they're moving into a new space, which is also going to feel disruptive in a different way, right? Kids who haven't been used to being around a lot of different people, a lot of different kids, and all of their needs and all of their disruptive behavior are going to need help being able to digest their emotional state at the moment and having some strategies to deal with that in order for them to be resilient in the face of this new situation that they're immediately going to find themselves in. But as you say, resilience is a big word and it means a lot of things. That's the piece we're unpacking today for this kind of immediate re-entry stage. But I would also say another piece of it, and there are probably many more than these two, but I'm just going to flag two, is around kids' executive functions and specifically their cognitive flexibility. So their ability to adapt as things change around them. We know this is not going to be the last change they experience as they re-enter the learning environment, right? We are already anticipating that there's likely going to be moments where they go back into distance learning and then come back into the school environment. So they're going to need a lot of skills in order to be able to navigate those changing situations over time. And that's something that I think is kind of step 2 on this resilience conversation for schools as kids come back into school. That is a very familiar spot for after school and summer providers, right? As youth developers, we are used to supporting kids, giving them tools to think about how they navigate the unavoidable barriers and challenges that they're going to come to. So that piece of resilience is very, I think, very familiar and another strong suit for after school and summer programs as partners in the school day.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I was even thinking, and I know my experience is very Chicago specific, and somebody said, you know, this current situation is different in every state and even within locales within states. But you were talking about the self-awareness reflection piece around resilience. And I was thinking about the first time I went to a grocery store in a mask and all my neighbors who I'm so close with and everyone's wearing a mask. And, you know, I felt impacted by that, and just being able to take a step back and think about how that made me feel and how I was going to move ahead in that new normal. And you're right, Katie, no matter where you are, programs and schools are going to look different in the next 6 months to a year. And so I really liked all of your, how you broke down resilience in order to help all of us, really the adults in the space and the young people, manage through that reality. So I appreciate your definition.
Thank you, Deb. And I would also say that it's a working definition, right? And we're going to unpack that more as we continue to experience what we're experiencing. Yeah. I realize that we didn't pause, as I promised, for questions along the way. So let's do a pause right now and see if Jill or Dawn have any questions that have come up in the chat box that you think would be good to address right now. We have just said a lot of words.
There are no questions. The only one is, will the PowerPoint be available?
Yes. And the answer is yes. Excellent. I answered that one. Okay. So I really encourage folks we're going to have some time for sure at the end of this. So whatever questions are coming up for you, please put them in the chat box and we'll circle back to you as we go. At this point,
there is one now that just came in hot off the press that you guys may want to address right now.
Okay.
How does the very real racism that exists in our world and in our educational system show up in our youth and their families and staff in the terms of cortisol and toxic stress?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how we can actively tackle this issue utilizing this information?
That is a really great and important and big question. We could definitely have many, many more webinars on that. The way Turnaround has been talking about this, and I think, you know, lots of folks and Deb, I'm going to jump this to you in a second, but is thinking about that a large part of the stress and the adverse childhood experiences people are having is based on institutional and systemic racism in our culture. So kids who are experiencing that every day are also experiencing higher levels of cortisol than anyone would like to have happen. And there are some research studies going on right now about those larger societal forces and what kind of impact they have on people's ACEs scores and therefore on their long-term health outcomes. So it is a very real part of all of this. And I would say a reason that schools and after school and summer programs really need to think about equity within their relationships, routines, and resiliency practices. So how are schools and after school and summer programs set up in order to make sure they are not they are environments where kids are experiencing positivity and equity and not experiencing the negative forces that are all too prevalent in our society. Deb, you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Katie. I mean, I'll only say, and again, I'm very city centric in my both research world and personal world, but we're also seeing, of course, the differential impacts of COVID based on race and SBS, which is only compounding the very issue that the person who asked the question, I'm sorry, I can't see the chat box, surfaced, and it's one that we have to pay very close attention as inadequate, one that we need to actively address as we persist in programs. I know many programs have stayed open and reopened schools. And so the other piece, which our colleagues at the National Urban League surfaced earlier, is a lot of the frameworks that we have used to talk about how young people learn and develop in schools have not by the design of their makers, but by the way they have been implemented, have been racialized. And this particular situation has amplified some of that, but also mixed up the alphabet soup. And so you're seeing young people who are affected by traumatic experiences who haven't been assigned that role in our society, and you've seen amplified effects on those who have had been living in persistent structural inequalities. So there's a lot to deal with there, as Katie talked about. The one thing that I'll say, stay tuned to, and we're happy to send it out to this group if they'll allow us to do it, is my good colleagues, including Jill Young, who's on here, along with Karen Pittman and David Osher and others have taken the science and other research and have just authored a piece on robust equity and transformative learning experiences combined to promote thriving, to address the very issue, Matt, that you, and now I see your name, that you elevate, and also other inequities outside of race. Thanks for bringing that up, and more to come.
There's one more from Alvy Miller. For resilience, I was wondering about the child noticing the silver linings that they found they were able to employ over the past months, and also thinking about how they can apply strategies that they found and bringing it into the present.
That is a great point. Yeah, I think the perspective that kids often get to on their own, but that can also be supported by the caring adults around them, is a huge factor in resiliency. I put that kind of in that frame of navigating challenges and barriers, like helping kids to see the glass half full and half empty, where do you see the opportunity in the situations that you're in? I am certainly having those conversations with my kids at home, so I can appreciate that. The other, I just wanted to flag another resource on that equity question. Zaretta Hammond has an excellent article that I believe is called An Equity Lens on the Science of Learning and Development. I may have flipped the title, but I would encourage folks to look for that. I think she does an amazing job of pointing out where the blue wheel needs to be very conscious about its approach to equity.
Yeah, I mean, this is stating the obvious, and I appreciate the silver linings comment. I had a colleague say the thin silver lining. They call it the thin silver lining that they've been finding, which I appreciate. But this is something we're all experiencing, and this is formative in all of our learning and development. This isn't a moment in time that we'll get beyond or develop around it. And so all of the challenges that we've all been talking about are real, but also the recognition of the things that we're coming to, we're realizing are part of that development as well.
Great. I'm going to move us into the next section, which is taking these tools and this perspective on whole child development and the role of after school and summer programs in partnership with schools. And Deb's going to talk a little bit about what some of the emerging redesign opportunities are or frameworks are for schools and school districts to help us think further about that fit.
Thanks, Katie. So as advertised early in this conversation, things are moving quickly. A week is like a year. Katie and I put this slide deck together not 2 weeks ago, but last week, and already things have changed. And so my promise to you in this presentation is we'll share what we knew when we put it together, and we will add what we know now before we send it out to you. So as you could imagine, or maybe if some of you are a part of, there are many K through 12 systems leaders who are endeavoring to create frameworks, guidance, checklists to help education agencies think about reopening. And again, that's going to vary state by state, as everything has varied state by state during the current efforts. We started to take a look at those frameworks as they started to come out. The Council of Chief State School Officers was one of the first to come out. Their Restart and Recovery guidance for schools. The Aspen Institute has put out 2 different pieces of guidance, one particular to social and emotional and academic development. So building on that work that we talked about much earlier in the conversation, and also thinking about recovery and renewal more broadly. And then the American Enterprise Institute put out a blueprint. These are 4. 3 more have come out since we made this pretty table for you. But what we want to elevate is that in each of these reopening documents, there are some emphasis on conditions for learning, which are the conditions in the blue wheel that Katie talked about, which are essential, absolutely foundational, or at the bottom of the pyramid if you're thinking about the youth program quality assessment tool, to supporting social and emotional learning. And bigger picture, that's school climate. So at the school level, how we understand the conditions for teaching and learning to happen. Social and emotional learning, which is of course that a very intentional and purposeful skill building, and mental health and trauma. And Katie talked a whole bunch about that in her description of brain development and how we can support young people as they're experiencing stress and trauma or have experienced stress and trauma. And it's so critically important. Schools and education agencies at the state and local level may be working with one of these sets of guidance, and they're going to have a long list of things to do because these are 3 categories that they need to work on, but they also need to work on things like building safety and guess what? Core content. Of course, young people are going to learn history and math and all of those things, and they are going to need expert partnership and help. So I'm fond of saying, and I do associate myself with the youth development field and as an after school and out of school time practitioner. So I kind of want to say, we're not just a helping hand, although we all need a helping hand right now, so that's not such a bad thing. But we are expert partners in that question on how are you doing and responding to that question. So I encourage all of you, whether you're in a school building or in a program in the community, to take a look at the guidance that your local education agencies might be working from and see what your role can be and help to articulate that with all that great validation that Katie just shared with you. Like, we're good at this stuff and we need this stuff right now. So these are some of the frameworks that, again, are kind of big in the field right now. We'll send this out and they're all hyperlinked so you can get right to them. You don't have to Google them, and we'll add the new ones that have come out since then. And I'm telling you, almost all of them have these categories in them.
So to put a finer point on it, I feel like we're really making the point. I would encourage you also, these are the quality standards for expanded learning programs from the state of California. Many states have these quality standards specifically for after school and summer programs. I would encourage you to think about how those connect with the things that Deb just talked about, because what's in those quality standards is the way you get to positive conditions for learning, positive school climate, social and emotional learning, and how you address mental health and issues of trauma. So I think we've said much on this topic, but I will say that the line is really clear, and just figuring out how to draw the line and who to draw it with is really important at this moment.
Yeah, and we don't have tons of time left, but I do want to share some quick tips that I think we've gone over, throughout the presentation, but just to sort of put a fine point on it. So look around, see who's a part of whole child redesign in schools, in programs, try to partner with them. If you have a local intermediary, if you're a part of a national organization, I saw some KIP folks on the call. If you have a local intermediary, like an Every Hour Counts intermediary, like the Partnership for Children and Youth that Katie used to work with, or if you have a statewide after-school network, and hint, you all have a statewide after-school network because there's one in all 50 states, they are working hard to make sure they are knowledgeable and a part of school reopening efforts. And so please do connect with them if you'd like to either know what they're doing and be ambassadors for their good work, or participate in some meaningful way. And again, we said it multiple times, families look to us, families know us, and families need support right now. We are networked, be accessible and available to families, double down on your family engagement strategies, reach out to the local family organization if it's a PTA or whatever, and also just reignite those partnerships that you may have had. Reach out to make new partnerships, because we can't do this alone, and they can't do it alone. And we want to make sure that we have those service pathways for young people and families as we reopen. And define your contribution. I'm not just being a nerdy researcher. Mental health, social and emotional learning, conditions for learning, school climate, quality, those are all important things, but they're not the same thing, and they all merit different responses. So we're going to be putting out some guidance, simple guidance on that. But as you're working with your local partners, try to understand what their unique contribution is, try to understand clearly what your unique contribution is, and then together we can clearly respond to families and young people's needs.
Thanks, Deb.
Yep.
All right, so we have a few minutes for questions. And so Dawn and Jill, if there are any other questions, we can take probably 2 more questions, and then we'll be wrapping up.
I don't see any questions. We were scurrying behind the scenes to find the link to the Zaretta Hammond article.
Oh, thank you, Dawn. I appreciate that.
We found that thanks to Laura Sykes.
Nice.
Yes, so no questions right now, but if anybody wants to quickly type something in.
Okay, while that's happening, Deb, do you want to talk through your slides on the Allied Youth Fields and other resources, and we'll grab a question if one comes in.
Sure. Earlier we talked a little bit about the ecosystem that we all live in and work in and play in, and now more than ever we need to look towards the Allied Youth Fields. Young people are navigating all of these different fields. Our workforce is navigating all of these different fields, and so I just want to kind of anoint you all with the science and the information that we shared, and really the responsibility we carry to support young people in their learning and development journey, so that when you talk to partners in these in the Allied Youth Fields, that we're all sort of coming to it with the same sense of responsibility towards supporting their learning in these developmentally rich, identity-safe learning environments.
Oh, shoot.
And lastly, just so you know, we're going to be, of course, sending out the PowerPoint, which many of you have asked for. There's a lot of great activity going on with the national intermediaries in our field to provide guidance and resources on remaining open. So many of programs remained open and are really champions for children and families in doing so, and also as they reopen and persist next year. So we'll be sending out this resource link, and you can click on it and it gets to all of these organizations' COVID-19 resources, which we wanted to make sure you had in your back pocket.
Great. Thanks so much, Deb. That's awesome. So here is our contact information. If you have questions after this that you want to reach out to us about, we're happy to do that. We will have Sam Piha from Temescal Associates, who's sponsoring this webinar. I didn't even say anything about that. Oh dear, sorry, Sam. He will send out this PowerPoint with the updated slide from AIR, and we have really appreciated your time and attention. Dawn, I'm assuming there aren't other questions, but if there are, we could take one question now.
Ladies are getting lots of kudos and thank yous in the chat box for the information and the value of the webinar. So,
okay, great. Thank you so much, Dawn and Jill. I really appreciate your role in manning the chat box and helping us sort through all of that. And Deb, thank you for taking the time to do this webinar with me. I have enjoyed myself immensely.
Thank you for having me, Katie. It was great, and really look forward to hearing everyone's stories and maybe reconvening in a few months to see how things are going.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.